Why some people retire at 45, while others work forever. Two people start their careers at the same time, earn similar salaries, and live similar lives. Yet one retires at 45 while the other works well into their 60s or even 70s. The difference isn't luck, inheritance, or intelligence. It's a few small money decisions most people ignore for decades. Discover the habits that quietly decide your retirement future. At first glance, retirement appears to follow a simple rule. Work long enough, save enough money, and eventually the years of effort will lead to freedom. That belief has been repeated for generations, shaping how millions of people approach their careers and financial lives. Yet reality tells a very different story. Some individuals reach financial independence in their 40s, sometimes even earlier, while others continue working well into their 70s and still feel financially trapped. The difference between these two outcomes is rarely explained clearly, which leaves many people assuming the answer must be luck, extraordinary income, or some secret investment strategy that only a few people know about. The truth is far more surprising. Early retirement is not usually the result of sudden wealth or perfect timing in the market. In most cases, it is the result of a completely different way of thinking about money, work, and time. The individuals who retire early rarely follow the same financial patterns as everyone else. While most people focus on earning income and maintaining a lifestyle, early retirees focus on building systems that reduce their dependence on income altogether. To understand why some people retire decades earlier than others, it helps to begin with the basic structure of how most financial lives operate. For the majority of people, money follows a predictable cycle. They exchange time and effort for a salary, use most of that salary to support their lifestyle, and save a small portion for the future. As income increases over the years, their lifestyle usually expands as well. Better housing, newer cars, more expensive habits, and greater convenience slowly absorb the additional income that once seemed like it would create financial freedom. This process is so common that it has a name: lifestyle inflation. Every time income increases, spending quietly grows alongside it. The result is a financial life where someone may earn significantly more money than they did 10 years earlier, but still feel financially constrained. Their expenses rise almost perfectly in step with their income, leaving little room for true financial independence. People who retire early approach this dynamic very differently. Instead of allowing lifestyle inflation to expand endlessly, they deliberately control it. When their income grows, their spending does not grow at the same speed. The gap between what they earn and what they spend becomes larger over time. That gap becomes the fuel for investment and asset building. This difference may appear small at first, but over many years, it produces dramatically different results. Someone who saves 10% of their income may eventually build a comfortable retirement fund after decades of work, but someone who saves 40 or 50% of their income accelerates the process enormously. The power of compounding means that larger investments earlier in life grow far more aggressively than smaller investments spread over longer periods. Another critical difference lies in how early retirees think about income itself. Most people focus on increasing their salary because salary feels like the most direct way to improve their financial situation. While higher income certainly helps, it does not automatically create freedom. Income tied directly to time still requires continuous effort. If someone must work every day to maintain their earnings, their financial life remains dependent on that routine. Early retirees shift their attention toward building assets that produce income independently of their daily work. These assets might include investments that generate dividends, businesses that operate without constant supervision, or financial structures designed to produce recurring returns. Over time, these income streams begin to reduce the amount of active work required to sustain a lifestyle. The key insight behind this approach is that financial freedom is not determined by how much money someone earns. It is determined by how much of their lifestyle can be supported without their direct labor. When passive or semi-passive income begins to cover a significant portion of living expenses, the relationship between work and survival starts to change. For many people, however, this shift never happens because they remain focused entirely on their careers. Careers can certainly produce strong income, but they often demand increasing amounts of time, energy, and responsibility. Promotions may bring higher pay, yet they frequently come with greater pressure and longer hours. While the financial rewards increase, the freedom associated with them does not necessarily grow at the same pace. This creates an interesting paradox. The people who appear most successful from the outside are sometimes the most financially dependent on their careers. Their lifestyle requires a high level of income, and maintaining that income requires continued commitment to demanding work. Stepping away becomes increasingly difficult because the financial structure surrounding their life depends on it. Individuals who retire early typically avoid building lifestyles that demand constant income growth. Instead, they design their financial lives around sustainability. They focus on creating systems where expenses remain manageable and assets gradually take on a larger role in supporting their lifestyle. Time also plays a crucial role in this process. The earlier someone begins investing aggressively, the more powerful compounding becomes. Money invested in the early stages of adulthood has decades to grow, multiply, and produce returns. Even moderate investment returns can become significant when given enough time. However, most people underestimate the importance of these early years. Retirement feels distant when someone is in their 20s or early 30s, so financial discipline often seems less urgent. Spending on convenience, entertainment, and lifestyle upgrades feels harmless because the long-term consequences appear far away. But those early financial decisions quietly determine how powerful compounding will be later. Early retirees treat those early years very differently. They understand that every dollar invested early has a disproportionate impact on long-term wealth. Instead of postponing serious investing until later in their careers, they prioritize it as soon as possible. This early momentum allows their investments to grow far beyond what most people achieve through later contributions. Another overlooked factor is mindset. Many individuals view retirement as a distant reward for decades of continuous work. Because of this belief, they structure their lives around the expectation that work will dominate most of their adult years. Financial planning then becomes focused on surviving until retirement rather than accelerating independence. Early retirees reject this assumption. They approach financial planning with a different question. Instead of asking how long they must work, they ask how quickly they can reduce the need to work at all. This question leads them towards strategies that maximize savings, prioritize asset creation, and minimize unnecessary expenses. This approach does not require extreme sacrifice or unusual intelligence. It requires clarity about long-term priorities and consistent alignment between spending decisions and financial goals. Over time, small decisions accumulate into powerful outcomes. The contrast between these two paths becomes increasingly visible as the years pass. One person gradually builds a portfolio of assets capable of supporting their lifestyle. The other continues relying primarily on earned income while hoping that decades of saving will eventually produce enough to retire comfortably. Both individuals may work hard. Both may earn respectable incomes. But their financial trajectories diverge dramatically because their strategies operate on completely different principles. One strategy slowly replaces the need for work. The other assumes work will continue indefinitely. That difference is often the reason why some people retire at 45, while others never truly retire at all. As the years pass, the gap between these two financial paths becomes increasingly visible. One person gradually builds a life where their investments, assets, and financial systems begin carrying more of the weight that their job once carried alone. The other person continues depending almost entirely on earned income, assuming that steady work will eventually lead to the same destination. At first, the difference between these two approaches may seem small. Both individuals may appear financially responsible. Both may contribute to retirement accounts and manage their expenses reasonably well. But beneath the surface, their strategies are quietly shaping completely different futures. The individuals who retire early tend to understand a principle that most people never fully recognize. Financial independence is not determined by income alone. It is determined by the relationship between income, spending, and assets. A person earning a moderate salary who saves aggressively and invests consistently can reach financial independence far sooner than someone earning a very high income but spending nearly all of it. Income creates opportunity, but behavior determines whether that opportunity turns into lasting freedom. One of the biggest traps that keeps people working for decades longer than they expected is the belief that earning more money will eventually solve their financial problems. At first, this belief seems logical. If someone feels financially constrained, the natural response is to pursue a higher salary or a better job. But in many cases, higher income simply fuels a more expensive lifestyle. New conveniences appear. Upgraded housing becomes appealing. Luxuries that once felt unnecessary begin to feel normal. Slowly, the additional income disappears into expanded spending. This process can repeat itself many times throughout a career. Each raise or promotion creates temporary financial relief, but that relief gradually fades as new expenses take its place. The individual begins working harder to maintain a lifestyle that now requires their full income. Over time, stepping away from work becomes increasingly difficult because the financial structure surrounding their life demands continuous earnings. People who retire early avoid falling deeply into this cycle. Instead of allowing income growth to automatically expand their spending, they treat increased earnings as a chance to accelerate asset building. Each raise becomes an opportunity to invest more aggressively rather than simply spend more comfortably. The difference between these two responses may seem subtle, but over many years, it compounds into dramatically different financial outcomes. Another major difference involves how people view time. Most individuals measure financial success in terms of salary or net worth. While these metrics can be useful, they often overlook a far more important resource: time freedom. Time freedom refers to the ability to choose how your time is spent rather than being required to exchange it continuously for income. Early retirees tend to measure progress through this lens. They focus not only on how much money they earn, but also in how much control they have over their schedule. Every asset they build, every investment they make, and every financial decision they take is evaluated based on whether it moves them closer to greater independence over their time. This shift in perspective leads to very different priorities. Instead of maximizing short-term lifestyle upgrades, they prioritize long-term flexibility. Instead of measuring success through visible symbols of wealth, they measure it through the gradual reduction of financial pressure. Over time, the impact of this mindset becomes powerful. As investments grow and assets begin producing income, the need to rely exclusively on employment slowly decreases. Even small streams of passive income can begin changing the relationship someone has with their job. Work becomes less about survival and more about choice. However, the path toward early retirement is not purely mathematical. It also requires resisting several psychological traps that keep many people stuck in long-term financial dependence. One of the most common traps is social comparison. Modern culture constantly promotes lifestyles built around consumption. Expensive homes, luxury vehicles, frequent travel, and constant upgrades are often presented as symbols of success. When people measure their progress against these visible markers, they may feel pressure to spend more simply to keep up with others. This comparison can quietly sabotage financial independence because it shifts attention away from long-term goals and towards short-term appearances. Early retirees often detach themselves from this cycle by focusing on personal financial metrics rather than external expectations. Another trap involves the assumption that financial independence requires extreme sacrifice or unusual luck. Because early retirement appears rare, many people assume it must be unrealistic. This belief discourages them from even exploring the possibility. Yet, in reality, the mathematics behind financial independence are surprisingly straightforward. The core formula is simple. When the income produced by investments and assets becomes large enough to cover living expenses, the need for traditional employment disappears. At that point, working becomes optional rather than necessary. Achieving this balance may take years of disciplined saving and investing, but it is fundamentally a matter of consistent progress rather than extraordinary events. What often accelerates this progress is the combination of three powerful financial shifts. The first shift is increasing the gap between income and spending. The larger this gap becomes, the more resources are available for investment. Even modest increases in savings rates can significantly reduce the time required to reach financial independence. The second shift is focusing on assets rather than possessions. Assets generate value over time, while possessions typically lose value or require ongoing expenses. Early retirees tend to prioritize acquiring assets that contribute to long-term financial growth rather than accumulating items that only provide temporary satisfaction. The third shift is allowing investments enough time to compound. Compounding works quietly but relentlessly, turning consistent contributions into substantial wealth over long periods. The earlier and more aggressively someone begins investing, the more dramatic this effect becomes. When these three shifts work together, financial progress can accelerate in ways that surprise most people. Investments grow, passive income begins appearing, and the timeline toward independence gradually shortens. What once seemed like a distant goal decades away begins moving closer with each passing year. Meanwhile, individuals who remain focused primarily on career income often find themselves on a different trajectory. Their financial lives revolve around maintaining employment rather than gradually escaping its necessity. Even if they save consistently, the pace of progress may remain slow because the majority of their income continues flowing into lifestyle expenses rather than long-term assets. This difference explains why two individuals with similar incomes can experience completely different financial futures. One gradually builds a system where money works on their behalf. The other continues working to maintain a system that requires their constant participation. Eventually, the results become impossible to ignore. One person reaches a point where their investments can comfortably support their lifestyle. At that moment, retirement becomes a choice rather than an obligation. They may continue working if they enjoy it, but they no longer depend on it for survival. The other person may still be working long hours, waiting for a future retirement that keeps moving further away. Despite years of effort and steady income, the financial structure surrounding their life still requires their presence. It is rarely luck. It is rarely talent. And it is almost never a single perfect investment. More often, it is the result of thousands of small financial decisions made consistently over many years. Decisions about spending, saving, investing, and prioritizing freedom over appearance slowly accumulate into life-changing outcomes. Because the moment money begins working harder than you do, the timeline of your entire life begins to change.